The morning Vivian Caldwell called the sheriff on me for fishing what she called HOA waters turned out to be the day she packed up and left the lake for good. There I was, just after sunrise, casting my line into the same quiet spot I'd been fishing for 24 years when her sharp voice cut across the water like a cracked whip. "You're trespassing, Mr. Harlan. This is private community property now." I didn't argue. I just smiled, reeled in my lure, and let the deputy do his uncomfortable job. What Vivian didn't know, what nobody in our little lakeside neighborhood knew yet, was that I didn't just have rights to fish that water. I owned every drop of it, right down to the lake bottom. And she had spent the last 6 months charging my neighbors $200 a month to use my own property. My name's Jack Harlan. I moved to Whispering Creek Lake back in 2001, after my wife Emily passed. Breast cancer took her at 47, and I needed somewhere the world felt small enough that I could breathe again. I bought a tired 2-acre patch of land, with an old cabin that was more rot than roof. Built the place back up myself, board by board, every nail driven with hands that were trying to forget how empty they felt. The lake became my morning church. I'd be out there before the mist burned off, listening to the loons, smelling pine and damp earth, feeling a little closer to Emily with every cast. That water healed parts of me no counselor ever could. Whispering Creek is a beautiful 45-acre natural lake tucked in the rolling hills of northern Tennessee. For decades, it was mostly modest cabins, retired teachers, veterans, and working folks who looked out for each other. We shared tools, traded fish, and nobody cared if your truck was 20 years old or your grass needed mowing. Then around 2016, the McMansion started going up. New money from Nashville and Atlanta discovered our quiet corner, and suddenly property values became the only conversation that mattered. That's when Vivian rolled in. She arrived in a silver Mercedes with a vanity plate that said something about living her best life. Fresh off a nasty divorce, 49 years old, with that perfect highlighted hair that never moved in the wind, and an attitude like she was still running a corporate compliance department. Within weeks, she had organized a concerned homeowners meeting, complete with spreadsheets and slides about protecting our investments. She painted a picture of lawsuits waiting to happen, falling property values, and irresponsible, long-time residents dragging the whole community down. 8 of the 25 properties bought in. The rest of us got certified letters demanding we join the new HOA and start paying $200 a month for lake access. I called her that same evening, polite as my mother raised me. "Ma'am, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but I'm not interested." Her voice went ice cold. "This isn't optional, Mr. Harlan. It affects everyone's investment." I told her I didn't have an investment. I had a home. She hung up on me. 2 weeks later, those ugly laminated signs started appearing around the shoreline. Private Whispering Creek HOA property. Members only. I kept fishing anyway. This was my ritual, my peace, my connection to the life I'd built after losing everything. But Vivian watched me. She took pictures from her big picture window like I was some kind of criminal. Then she made the call that started this whole war. That same afternoon, a sheriff's deputy I'd known for years pulled up to my dock looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Sorry, Jack," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Vivian filed a formal complaint. I gotta ask you to leave the water for now." I nodded, packed up my tackle without a fuss, but as that box clicked shut, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. Vivian had drawn a line in the sand and decided the whole lake belonged on her side of it. She didn't stop there. Within days, violation notices started showing up on doorsteps. Ruthie Thompson, sweet 72-year-old widow, 3 cabins down, got fined $50 a day for her collection of garden gnomes that had been sitting in her flower beds since the Reagan administration. The Garcia family received a warning about their little fishing boat that had been tied up at their dock for 15 years. Old Man Ellis got cited for his vegetable garden ruining the community aesthetic. Vivian personally delivered most of those letters in her crisp pastel outfits, and that satisfied little smile that made your blood run hot. I stayed quiet at first, but I started digging. Drove down to the county courthouse in Ridgeview and spent hours in the land record's office with a clerk named Doris, who'd been there longer than most folks had been alive. Doris slid her glasses down her nose, looked at the HOA paperwork Vivian had filed, and just shook her head. This is sloppier than a Sunday potluck, Jack. They're missing half the required survey and boundary descriptions. You can't just declare a lake common property because you want to. That's when she started teaching me about riparian rights and old mineral deeds. Turns out a lot of folks around here never really knew what they owned beneath the water. While I was learning, Vivian kept pushing. She hired a security guard who lasted exactly 4 days watching me fish. Poor kid looked miserable every time I waved at him and kept casting anyway. Then came the attorney letter, thick expensive paper demanding $500 in back fees and immediate compliance. Ruthie showed up at my door that evening with the letter trembling in her hands. Jack, I don't have that kind of money. Those gnomes were my husband's. They're all I got left of him. I put my hand on her shoulder and told her not to pay a dime. Something in my voice must have changed, because she looked at me different after that, like she knew I wasn't just fighting for my fishing spot anymore. I hired a surveyor named Pete, who spent a full morning walking my property lines with his equipment. When he finished, he was grinning like he'd won the lottery. Jack, your deed goes further out into that lake than anybody realized, and there's language in your grandfather's original purchase from the old mining company back in the 40s that's, well, it's special. That sent me on a 3-day trip to the state archives in Nashville. I sat in a dusty basement, surrounded by boxes older than my father, reading yellowed papers until my eyes burned. What I found stopped me cold. My grandfather had bought full mineral and subsurface rights to the entire lake bed when the mining company folded. Those rights had passed down clean and clear, never sold, never challenged. The water, the bottom, the fishing, the swimming, all of it had legally been mine for decades. I sat in my truck in the parking lot afterward, just staring at the documents, heart pounding. Vivian wasn't just being a bully. She had been running a 6-month-long shakedown on my own property, collecting money from my neighbors like it was her personal ATM. The realization tasted like iron and justice all at once. Back at the lake, things were getting uglier. Vivian put up a fancy white vinyl fence right across the old walking path the older folks used every morning for their doctor-ordered exercise. She installed security cameras aimed at my favorite fishing spots. She filed noise complaints about my boat, called the health department on my septic system, and even tried to get my dock declared illegal, even though it had been standing longer than she'd been alive. Her greed and insecurity fed each other. She'd left a big city divorce with money, but no real power, and controlling this lake had become her new identity. Every time someone pushed back, she doubled down harder because admitting she might be wrong would crack the perfect image she'd built. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found yet, not even Ruthie. I just kept collecting evidence, talking quietly with Doris at the courthouse, and meeting with a sharp attorney named Marcus Hale who actually whistled when he read my deeds. Jack, he said, leaning back in his chair, you don't just own the lake. You own the right to tell every single one of her little rules to go straight to hell. We started building a case so tight it would make a judge smile. Meanwhile, I let Vivian keep digging her hole deeper. She scheduled a big county commission meeting, printed fancy programs, invited the local paper, and even booked a caterer for her victory party afterward. She told her shrinking group of supporters that after this meeting the lake would finally be properly managed, and people like me would learn their place. The night before the meeting, I sat on my porch listening to the loons, thinking about Emily and the life we never got to finish here. I thought about Ruthie's gnomes and the Garcia kids who just wanted to fish without paying some newcomer rent on water that had always been free. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm in that deep, certain way you get when you know the truth is finally going to have its say. The next evening, the county commission room was packed tighter than a church on Easter Sunday. Vivian showed up early in a cream-colored pantsuit that screamed money. flanked by her remaining supporters, and those 3 neighboring HOA presidents she'd invited like backup singers. She had her PowerPoint ready, graphs glowing on the screen, and that confident smile plastered across her face as she laid out her whole vision for protecting our community. Asset, she talked about safety liability, falling property values, and how certain long-time residents refused to get with the program. When she pointed at photos of me fishing and called it unauthorized commercial activity, a couple people actually chuckled, but she powered through like a freight train. She finished by asking the commissioners to officially recognize her HOA and give them enforcement power over the whole lake. Then she sat down looking like she'd already won. Commissioner Hayes called my name. I walked up carrying nothing but a plain manila folder and the same worn flannel I'd fished in that morning. The room got real quiet. I looked straight at Vivian for a second, then turned to the commissioners. "Thank you for hearing us tonight," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I agree that the lake needs good management. That's why I've been paying the property taxes on it for 24 years. I laid the certified deed on the table, then the chain of title going all the way back to my grandfather's purchase from the old mining company. This lake bed and the water rights have belonged to my family since 1947. Not shared, not common, mine. Every foot of it." You could have heard a pin drop. Vivian shot up out of her chair, face going from tan to ghost white. "That's impossible. We researched this." Her voice cracked for the first time. My attorney Marcus stood up calm as could be and walked them through the documents, explaining how mineral rights and riparian law worked in this case. Doris from the courthouse confirmed the tax records. The county assessor added that Vivian's own deed stopped at the high water mark like everyone else's. She had never paid a dime on the lake itself because it wasn't hers to claim. One by one the pieces fell, and with each new document the air in that room got heavier. Her treasurer stood up right there in front of everybody and said, "I'm done. This isn't what I signed up for," then walked out. The rest of her group started shifting in their seats like they wished the floor would swallow them. When the commissioners came back from their quick recess, the ruling was short and clear. Vivian's HOA had no legal standing. All the signs, fences, and cameras had to come down within 72 hours. Any money collected had to be refunded. And if anyone trespassed on my property again, charges would be filed. Vivian grabbed her purse and practically ran for the door, those expensive heels clicking fast across the tile, while the local reporter tried to catch her for a comment. All she could manage was a shaky, "no comment," before disappearing into the parking lot. A week later, the lake was quiet again. The fence came down. The cameras disappeared. Those ugly signs vanished like they'd never existed. Ruthie threw a big Saturday cookout, and half the neighborhood showed up, even some folks who had originally sided with Vivian. We pulled posts, filled holes, and laughed about garden gnomes, while the Garcia kids ran around with fishing rods. I put up one simple wooden sign down by the boat launch that read, "Whispering Creek Lake Family Property. All respectful neighbors welcome, fish clean, leave no trace, nobody pays a cent. Just common sense and decency." Vivian listed her house 2 weeks later and was gone within a month. Sold at a loss. The new family that moved in told me their boys couldn't wait to get their first fishing poles out on the dock. Ruthie's gnomes are back in full force, bigger and brighter than ever. We started a little annual lake cleanup day, and even a small scholarship in my grandfather's name for local kids, studying the environment. The whole thing taught me something I already knew deep down. Bullies don't usually lose because they run into someone richer or meaner. They lose when they finally run into the truth, and a man who's tired of being pushed. I still get up before dawn most mornings, walk down to that same spot, and cast my line while the mist rises off the water. The loons still call, the pine smells just as sweet, and I feel Emily smiling down on the piece we finally got back. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching someone who tried to steal your peace realize they picked a fight with the one guy who actually owned the whole damn battlefield. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your worst HOA horror story in the comments. Have you ever dealt with someone trying to control what shouldn't belong to them? Where do you stand on property rights versus community rules? When does a good idea like homeowners associations cross the line into straight-up bullying? Tell me your thoughts, whether you think I was too patient or should have come out swinging sooner. I read every single one. If this story hit home, give it a like, share it with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life justice stories from folks who finally stood their ground. Some lakes heal you. Others teach you how to fight for what's yours. Thanks for listening.